Bruce DuMont back for hour number 2 of Beyond the Beltway, wherever you're listening from coast to coast and border to border. Nice to have you with us. And we now have someone who's joining us from Kendall. His name is Kendall, and he's joining us from Dolton, South Dakota. Go ahead, Kendall. You're on the air. There's about 38 people in your town, right?
Yeah, we got more dogs than people.
Okay. Well, what can we do for you today? Nice to hear from you.
Well, I'm kind of a little confused sometimes. I keep hearing, especially the Democrats, they keep going on and on about the illegal annexation of the Crimea. It seems perfectly logical to me. I mean, the port of Silverpol, I can't pronounce it very good, but it's Russia's only warm water port. After the breakup of the Soviet Union, they had a 99-year lease on the port, and then when the government got changed, they lost access to their port. It seems completely logical, and we would have done the exact same thing in their shoes. Like if California ever succeeded from the Union, does anybody think we'd actually give up the port of San Diego?
Phil, your response to our caller.
Yeah, using military force against a sovereign nation is sort of like war. I think we set bad precedents when we go invade countries instead of negotiating, but the Russians are good at sort of doing that.
Well,
And
the
then
Ukrainians aren't in the least bit interested in negotiating. They said, get out of our port. Well, fine and dandy. I mean, it's Russia's only warm water port. It seems completely utter logical to me. I mean, we'd have done the exact same thing.
David, do you agree with that? I mean, that from a strategic standpoint, what Russia did was fine insofar as Kendall is concerned.
Well, I think it's perfectly understandable why Russia would want access to those ports. The question is how they go about obtaining that access. To use force and to invade a sovereign nation because the Russians are not interested in negotiating or they don't like the terms that the Ukrainians are suggesting, I think is simply wrong. I don't think it's all. I also do not agree with the moral equivalency that the U.S. would simply barge in and take over areas that we wanted to control and the consequences be damned. We do have some semblance of international order, or at least we used to.
Your reaction, Brian?
Do American citizens want to go to war with Russia over a port in Ukraine? I mean, it's wrong the way Russia goes about doing things. And they're doing it again now in another province. I think it's called Doma. And Zelensky's actually going to let the people there have a vote to decide where they want to go, which I think is the best way they can handle that. But it's like looking at Hong Kong or Taiwan. Are we willing to go to war with another country over that? I remember, I'm old enough to remember when Republicans were accusing Obama of being a Russian puppet with the way he was talking with Dmitry Medvedev from Russia and him not doing anything on Crimea. But we can't commit our troops everywhere around the world for that.
Well, Brian, let me ask you a question. Do you think it is ever appropriate for the United States to exercise military force to protect the treaties that we have with allies and engage in mutual defense?
They'd have to make a really good case for it and get approval from Congress. I'm sure that those
what
points
about
exist.
treaties? What about treaties that have been duly ratified by the United States Senate?
Well, look at NATO. We have an obligation to defend Turkey, and not, fight with Turkey. So there's things that we're in, whether we like them or not, we may be obligated to do that. So legally, yes. Morally, ethically, well, that's up for debate on each issue.
I think what I find interesting in this, just taking a step back, is the outrage that people on the left side of the aisle and some moderate Republicans have toward what Russia is doing and Trump's response to what Russia's doing when during the Obama administration, the Russian reset button that Hillary brought over to them, they brought that out 3 weeks after Putin invaded Georgia. And it wasn't so much a concern what Russia was doing at that time. And it wasn't so much a concern what was going on in Ukraine, hence they didn't give them any aid for 8 years. But when Trump comes to the fore and he becomes president, it is all of a sudden he's a puppet of Putin, which I find outrageous considering he murdered or had 200 of Putin's mercenaries murdered in Syria, affixed sanctions, and has armed Ukraine. But somehow Trump is a puppet of Putin, and we need to be concerned with Russian aggression, which was really not the case in the mainstream when Obama was in power for 8 years. And I find that to be pretty disingenuous.
Kendall, I want to go back to you to get your response to something. First of all, how interested are you and how interested are the other 37 people in your town How much do they talk about national politics, and how much do they talk about the hearings and the impeachment? Do they care about it?
I think we just assumed that when the Democrats took over the House, they were going to impeach Trump.
You're right.
Mm-hmm.
That was just a given. I don't think the reason matters. I have a neighbor who's extremely progressive, and I asked her straight up, would it matter to you if they impeached Trump, that you knew the reasons were completely false? Would it bother you at all? And she says no.
Right.
As long as Trump's gone, they don't care. The facts don't matter at all in this, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the facts do matter, and we've had an abundance of them revealed during the hearings that we've just seen over the last couple of weeks. So
But
I agree.
people
You shouldn't.
they don't all agree with the facts. though.
Well, look.
And there's still facts.
Well,
that you
no.
don't agree with something
Well,
that's a fact
we don't
is,
take a
is a
poll on
problem.
whether
You
or
know,
not
it is
something's true.
amazing. It is amazing. Let's talk about facts for a moment. It is amazing with a word, an objective word like fact, and the media puts forward facts all the time. But when it's gotten to the point where one person's interpretation of a fact doesn't mean that it actually is a fact. I have already said that everybody, including Sondland, has said, I presume, this was my impression. You had Adam Schiff and company ask people, what was your impression? What was your feeling? What was your view? Things that you never would hear in a courtroom to convict somebody. So we're going to talk about facts left, right, and center. But we have to ask ourselves, whose facts?
And it's not just arguing with what is a fact or isn't a fact. It's people arguing, are the facts something that makes something impeachable? Is it that high of an offense? That's what the debate is at.
And
Bill.
let's be clear here. Impeachment is a political process.
Yes, it is.
So when we want to talk about rules and evidence and that's a non sequitur, quite frankly, because it's political. So let's go by what the political rules of the game are, not what the legal jurisprudential rules of the game are. You don't get to have it both ways.
Yeah.
And
And
the
also,
politics is the politics.
it all feeds the court of public opinion, which is what this show is about. And again, Kendall, thank you very much for calling from Dalton, South Dakota. Again, first time we've heard from them, and we hope to see you again and bring your other 37 fellow citizens to the show next week, okay? Thanks for calling. Let's go to Phil in Downers Grove. You're on the air.
Hi, Bruce.
Hello.
Hi, love your show.
Thank you.
And I have a question for your panel because I'm really confused about this.
Yeah.
I watched Representative Stefanik question Ambassador Yovanovitch on PBS, okay? And what I got out of this is Yovanovitch confirmed during that questioning that the State Department was investigating Ukraine corruption and specifically Hunter Biden's conflict of interest during the Obama administration, okay?
Yes.
My question is this. If the previous administration was investigating this corruption, what is wrong with Trump asking about the same thing?
Well,
David.
the answer is the Obama administration, and during the time that Vice President Biden was in Ukraine, the investigation was going on into Burisma. It was not an investigation of the Bidens, and it was being conducted by a prosecutor. There was universal understanding that he was corrupt. So it was not a policy of the Obama administration to investigate the Biden connection. There were questions raised about the propriety of Hunter Biden working for the company.
We got to stop.
That's a nepotism.
Phil, so we're going to stop right now for a break, but stay on the line. We'll come back to you. DuMont back in Chicago. We've got Phil calling from Downers Grove. He's on the line with us. Phil, follow up on what you've heard thus far.
You mean to repeat the question or what?
No, did you have any response? Because David responded to you. Do you have any further comment to make?
Yeah, the comment I got is when I watched that, basically the ambassador confirmed that part of that was looking at Hunter Biden and the corruption. Specifically, she acknowledged that when she was questioned.
Yes, she did that, and that was yet that wasn't necessarily big news to me. That was to me, that was news. It didn't get a lot of play,
No,
but again,
the comment was that there were questions raised about the propriety of Hunter Biden
Yes.
working at the firm. Was it a conflict of interest?
Right.
But no one has ever found or alleged that there was criminal wrongdoing going on there.
no one has.
So-
No one that I have heard has said that, other than it is the appearance of impropriety.
Right.
And I think Phil, a couple of weeks ago, kind of stunned me when he didn't think there's an appearance there. But a lot of other people who've had the Democratic seat disagree with that.
And Phil, I think the difference here is that here we have a president of the United States who is pushing for investigations that could implicate one of his strongest political rivals. That is suggesting that a foreign nation should get involved in what Dr. Hill described as a domestic political errand. That's the problem.
Okay, listen, Phil, thank you very much for your call. We do appreciate it. We do have a response here from Grant listening to us. He said that he's very concerned about the way the Republicans seem to be taking the Soviet or the Russian disinformation and using it as part of their talking points. And he said the news of this past week made clear there is nothing patriotic about supporting the Republican Party. David,
Well,
you're a Republican.
Yeah, I think that the point there is that, as Dr. Hill made clear in her comments, this narrative is something that's been promulgated by the Russian security services themselves. And to the extent that we buy into it uncritically, we're helping to advance that narrative. That's not a good thing. I think we have to remember that the United States has had a long-standing position of skepticism when we're dealing with Russia because their interests are antithetical to the United States. And administration after administration, Republican and Democrat, have upheld those principles. And suddenly we see a weakening of that resolve, apparently, which, as a Republican who believes in domestic security and believes that the United States has a role to play in confronting Russian aggression, that concerns me greatly.
During the election of 2016, however, Donald Trump was very clear that he just said, we don't necessarily have to be enemies with everybody. We can talk with everybody. And clearly his message to the voters was, we can be friends with Russia. He said that we can be friends with everybody.
Korea.
So my question to you is, now, Republican voters heard that. They also heard for years, John McCain, who certainly was a war hawk when it came to the Russians. He thought they were the world's worst people on the face of the earth. And Republican primary voters had a chance to vote, and they did, and they nominated Donald Trump. And Donald Trump made the same case during the campaign, and Donald Trump became president of the United States. So aren't there a number of people out there who agree with the president's position and may disagree with your position?
Absolutely. But there's a difference between sharing the president's skepticism toward involvement in foreign affairs and trying to sort of create a better relationship with Russia and giving away the store when it comes to policy and helping Vladimir Putin advance his strategic interests.
Where has he done that in your view?
For example, when the
Syria.
president, is Syria for sure, because we've had a policy of supporting the Kurds. The president abruptly withdrew the military security assistance, which allowed the Russian forces free rein to go in there and to begin slaughtering the Kurdish forces that had been helping us, don't forget, maintain a kind of a safe zone in northern Syria. That and the fact that you have the president going to Helsinki and on a stage with Vladimir Putin saying, I don't really think that the combined judgment of my own security forces is correct. I believe Vladimir Putin when he talks about Russia's non-interference in our elections.
So
that is not helpful.
So I know I sound like a throwback here to some like Cold War era. The Russians are not our friends. Full stop. And anybody who believes that, I'm going to question their patriotism. They are not our friends. Their interests are opposite our interest. So
To
anybody
what-
who
to
is
what-
supportive of
to
them,
what-
I can't understand. I can't
To
wrap
what-
my head around that.
To what extent do we take that
Mm-hmm.
and move towards a possible conflict with the Soviet Union, or Russia rather? At what point do we say, you know what, we agree with that, but you know what, push has come to shove here, and it's time for us to get the troops and send the boys off to
Right.
fight somewhere? Do we do it or not? I mean, Democrats usually have been opposed to that because I think the tough talking rhetoric against the Russians generally have come from Republicans with also some hawks within the Democratic Party, virtually all of whom are gone.
So what I understand about going to war, and I hope the civilians in the audience and on the panel understand this. The military is the last people who want to go to war.
I understand.
I am one of those people that I do not want to use military force because that means our diplomacy has failed. And so all the stuff leading up to that needs to be better done. If that's sanctions, which that may work. If it's international pressure, whatever it is, that's the last option. And if that's the last option, and we got to do that, then it's going to depend on where.
Do you believe there are forces on Earth, and I'm not limiting this to Russia, do you believe there are forces on Earth that no matter what, they're not going to accept diplomacy? And the only way you're going to get their attention is a slap to the head.
Like Kim Jong-un?
Perhaps.
Yeah. I believe that there's...
Or in the Middle East?
China?
No, China... I don't think China would understand force. China plays the long game. They're better at playing the long game than we are.
Well,
so force for them I think is only domestic.
I want to hear from our other side of the
What
family.
I wanted to ask you, Phil, about regarding Syria, we had troops there, and it wasn't even that really many that were in that northern part.
2,000.
But the question is, what are they there for? Are they there to guard against Turkey, or are they there to stop Iranian influence, or is it Russian influence? Was it against, Assad's Syrian government, or was it there to support the Syrian defense forces, the ones that we weren't fighting against, but the ones that we armed? What exactly were we doing there, and what were our specific interests at that point, or was it just supporting the Kurds? And the Kurds have multiple issues too,
and multiple factions.
There's a lot of things going on in there. So you could make a case for us fighting against Russia and being a Russian puppet based from week to week. And I'm asking this because I don't even know exactly what our plan was from Obama through to Trump. It's kind of a mess.
I got to take a call. Tom, listening to us in Sharon, Pennsylvania, on WPIC. Go ahead.
Good evening, Bruce, and happy Thanksgiving to you
Thank you.
and your
Same to you.
panel and everyone there.
Same to you.
And I have two requests, and I hope if we run into a break that you hold me over. The first one is for Jennifer. And Jennifer, I really appreciate your being there. And you're holding up the Trump side of the argument very well. Roger Stone was convicted in all 7 counts by a jury pool in Washington, D.C. that voted, or at least they're registered, 93% of them voted for Hillary and 7% for Trump. What's wrong with that picture? I think we need a change of venue for all these trials that are going on regarding this political issues from Washington, D.C. to a federal court where it's more 50-50 or at least far less 93-7. That's point one.
Let's let everybody respond to that. What do you think, Jennifer?
Well, I have never heard that point made before. We all know the concept of moving a trial to an area that isn't
Change of venue.
Yeah, change of venue. Thank you. But that takes a defense, Roger Stone's defense or other people's defense, Paul Manafort's defense. It takes a savvy defense. And that argument that you just made, I think that was an argument that maybe should have been made because, yes, in D.C. and New York, there were a couple trials that took place in New York. These are areas that are, pardon the expression, hotbeds of anti-Trump and anti-Republican feeling. So I think you have an interesting point
Phil,
there.
what do you think about that idea?
I am not familiar enough with the jurisprudence that says that political ideology should be a consideration in a trial. I get that you're supposed to get a trial by a jury of your peers, and my understanding of that peerage is that it's geographical, and that's where the crimes were purported to have taken place, and so you get the jury that you get.
David Cohn.
Well, I think it's ludicrous to speculate about the political leanings of those who were selected for the jury pool. But secondly, we have to point out that in a criminal trial, such as the one that Roger Stone underwent, there is a process of voir dire where the counsel on both sides have an opportunity to interview the witnesses to try and see if they have any political bias. Do you have any background that might render you incapable of offering a fair and unbiased judgment on these facts. So unless you're suggesting that our jury trial system itself is non-functional, I just don't see how that is.
Can you say OJ trial?
Yeah, but I mean, even there, I mean, you're mixing apples and oranges here.
I don't think I am, because the Inspector General has already actually referred several people for trials, and there's a Kevin Kleinsmith, and Bruce, this is where you come in. If you could get Dan Flynn, who's a senior editor of the American Spectator, because he just recently wrote an article in the American Spectator entitled "CNN Bombshell, FBI Lawyer Altered FISA Warrant." And he contends that this Kevin Kleinsmith and several other people not only were on the investigation for Hillary's email server, but also on the Trump-Russia collusion situation. And
Tom,
on
we got a break. We'll be. Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll go to calls in just a moment. But I want to talk about some other big issues. And Phil, I know you feel strongly about the issue involving the president and his actions recently with the 3 members of the military who've been charged with either crimes against society or certainly against a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You're appalled by it. And so much so that the Secretary of Navy has said that he's going to be out the door because he doesn't like what the president's up to. Tell us about the importance of this story in your opinion, and I want to let everybody weigh in on it.
Since the Uniform Code of Military Justice was sort of implemented in 1950, it has been that with the Manual Court-Martial and Military Rules of Evidence been the documents for jurisprudence for the military. Military law is different than civilian law.
Right.
And one of the key things that the military has to maintain is good order and discipline. Breakdown in good order and discipline leads to a rabble. That we can't have in our military. So the UCMJ does have its political elements. I grant you that. There have been instances. There were 2 F-16 pilots from the Illinois National Guard, for example, who were involved in an incident in Afghanistan that killed some Canadian soldiers, and Canada wanted some accountability. And so these pilots were court-martialed. Unfortunately, it's what Clausewitz called friction. It's the stuff that we don't plan for that happens in war, and yet the political consequence was we had 2 of our pilots court-martialed for their actions in combat. So yes, there are political court-martials, but generally they are to maintain good order and discipline. The President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief, granted, and leaders who actually understand leadership don't do things because they can. They do things because they should. And what the Commander-in-Chief should do is trust the process. That system is a very effective, very efficient system of meting out justice. And if those are the determinations that those court-martials decided, you go with that. Because at the end of the day, by law, every court-martial is reviewed in the Court of Military Appeals anyway.
Right, and the point that Phil's making here is that since the UCMJ was adopted, that there has been a very strong prohibition, indeed a tradition of presidents not inserting themselves into the military justice system. For President Trump to do this is something that is disturbing people in the military leadership across the board. It's really just a question of whether the commander-in-chief is going to allow the military system of justice to work its process as it has for many decades. It's really not a partisan issue. It's not Republican or Democrat. It's a question of how does our civilian command authority interact with the military leadership. And when it comes to military justice matters, it's been a hands-off policy.
Your reaction, Jennifer?
My understanding, and I haven't been following this too closely, unfortunately, but my understanding is that this Spencer, Commander Spencer, was fired by the Navy Secretary, if I'm correct on that, because he went to the president in contravention of his public statements. He went to the president and tried to make a backdoor deal.
That's violating the chain of command. That's a different question. We're talking about the president's insertion into the sanctions that are being proposed for this Navy SEAL and countermanding that. What you're talking about is the dismissal of a official within DOD for going outside the chain of command. That's a different question.
Well, it's a different question, but I think it is somewhat related because this individual was terminated. I think the impression might be out there that Trump terminated this person, or that this person quit in protest, resigned in protest, but he was in fact fired because he tried to do a backdoor deal with the president, which the president rejected. So, but not saying your point is invalid, but I'm just adding that.
But part of this discussion, it seems to me, is that you have the wife of at least one of these participants. She was on Fox News all the time.
Yes, she was.
She was going out in the public making her case, much like Patty Blagojevich has done that in making the case for Rod Blagojevich to be, pardoned by the president. And the point is, by using the court of public opinion, that is meant, at least in the people that do it, it's meant to usurp the military code of military
and it
justice.
undermines military authority.
Yeah.
It undermines them. Let
It turns
the
everything
system
into
work.
a
a political
Right.
football, and that's not what the UCMJ and not what military justice is about.
If that happens once, it continues to happen again and again. I think self-regulation of the military, they can handle it fine on their own.
Okay. Let's move on. Thanks very much. Let's go to Diane, listening to us in San Francisco. She's listening to us on KTKZ. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Oh, hey. Well, this kind of goes back to goes back to something you were talking about earlier, and it's like, when Schiff came out and we had all those hearings and stuff, it's like all the opinions and the commentary are based only on Schiff allowing Democrat witnesses and questions, and that is hardly open debate. And it's like really necessary for conservatives to question witnesses and put up their own ideas, their own questions, and it's like everything is directed to undermine President Trump, including the media. Everything is directed to undermine President Trump, not to get at truth.
But Diane, let me ask this based on the hearings that I have watched over the last couple of weeks. And I agree with you that Adam Schiff has not given the Republicans the wish list of witnesses that they would like to bring forward. And many of those that have come forward have been subpoenaed to do so. So they're not doing it voluntarily. The Democrats have had an opportunity to question those witnesses after usually a lengthy opening statement. And then they have gone back and forth and they've let the Republicans interrogate these same people. How is that not letting the Republicans question what the witnesses have said?
Well, because I think, number one, Schiff will cut them off if they go.
If their time goes over, which
Well,
is clear,
yeah.
which is the go ahead, but go ahead with your point. I mean, if they go over time, I think both sides have been told to wrap it up.
Well, it's just my opinion that he doesn't allow their witnesses, any witnesses, to counter witnesses he wants to bring up, and that's just my opinion. And I think that
No, I think there's reason to believe that. I'm just questioning whether or not the Republican members of the House have been able to utilize their time wisely. And like anything else, there are people that I think do a good job, and there are people that don't do a very good job. I think Jim Jordan, a lot of Democrats say
Yeah.
Jim Jordan comes to play.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he
And by the way, the Republicans who were on the committees of jurisdiction did have an opportunity to question all the witnesses during their depositions that were held behind closed doors that preceded the hearings.
They did, but I think speaking to Diane's point, there's a couple things that happened. I think the Republicans were brilliant in questioning these witnesses, so much so that the hearings did not go the way the Democrats would have liked them to go. But speaking to Diane's point, there were two things that were fundamentally unfair, and I think a lot of people, the casual observer might come away with this. The wish list that the Republicans put forward, they got nobody on that wish list. So it wasn't even let me meet you halfway. It was get out of here with that list. We're not putting one of your people up, which is patently unfair. Secondly, when it came to questioning the witnesses, the Republican questioners were not allowed under Schiff's rules to yield back the remainder of their time to another sitting representative. This is why they had a scuffle during the hearing. They could only yield back their time to Republican counsel. So there were two changes here that any person looking at this would say, you know what, that wasn't very magnanimous of you. Here we are trying to remove a president from your opposition party, and you're not exactly making it hospitable to the other side and giving the appearance, which I think would have been very important for them, giving the appearance of, hey, we are going to give you every opportunity, Republicans, to participate in this unencumbered. And they
Was
didn't
that
do
a mistake?
Look,
Dave?
first of all, I have to correct the record here, Jennifer. The rules of engagement at the hearings were the same for the Republicans and the Democrats. Yes, you had a chairman, Congressman Schiff, in charge with the gavel running the committee, but he could not cede time to other Democrats, just as Mr. Nunes could not cede time to Republicans. The rules were exactly the same for both sides. Secondly, after that period of questioning where it was only the chair or the ranking member and their respective counsels who got to engage the witnesses, individual members of the committee also got time on an equal basis to question the witnesses.
Why don't you tell us why the Republicans didn't get anybody on their list? Not a single one.
Well, the Democrats declined to agree to issue a subpoena for Hunter Biden, for example, or for others who, and this, by the way, the
No,
rules.
there were other people on that list.
But the rules under which the hearings were
Whistleblower.
conducted, the rules under which these hearings were conducted, were adopted very early on and approved by Republicans, and they're very similar to the rules that were used during the Clinton impeachment. I know because I was there.
So I guess what just baffles me is I thought we established this is a political process.
Yes.
And in political processes, when you have the votes, that's all that matters.
Right.
And talking about
You're
being
not looking for
magnanimous, the animosity that is clear in the House didn't start in 2019. It started a while
This
ago.
is all very interesting because according to the Democrats, they say that this isn't, they say it's not a political process. They say it's about protecting democracy, and we are doing our constitutional duty, and that even if it costs us elections, and I'm sure the moderate Democrats are like, wait a minute, what are you saying? Even if it costs us elections, we must do the right thing. If that's how you feel, then you ought to let the Republicans put up any witness they darn well want.
Well, they will be able to do that
At
if
the
indeed
trial.
there is a trial in the Senate.
At
You
the
will
trial.
get a lot more
Can't wait.
involvement in some of these other people that don't want to talk. They too will be subpoenaed. I'm Bruce DuMont from coast to coast and border to border and around the world on BeyondTheBeltway.com and all of the great radio stations that you're listening to us.
You'd use it for international travel.
Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I want to hear about Michael Bloomberg. Michael Bloomberg is about to spend $50 million on television advertising, which is more than all the Democrats have spent thus far on advertising. And although there are many people that may not know who Michael Bloomberg is now, Michael Bloomberg is in there to, to rough up the turf and make things difficult for Donald Trump. Can he make a difference? I'll ask our Democrat, Phil. Are there people crying for Michael Bloomberg to get in this race?
I don't think that he'll get any traction in terms of grassroots or popular support. I think depending on what his strategic positioning is around his messaging, being sort of anti-Trump, New Yorker to New York or whatever, or now New Yorker to Floridian or whatever that is now, that may get some traction. But I don't think that he gets traction as a candidate.
David, what about it?
Beyond his ability to self-fund and get his message out, I don't understand what part of the constituency is he appealing to.
Moderate Republicans?
I guess, but I just don't see. I'd have to hear a little bit more about how he's planning to approach this because we're pretty far into the campaign and nomination process here, and he's a late entry. Obviously, he's a known figure, but I don't really see what he brings substantively that's different to the race.
I
Our
think
libertarian.
his logo gives me a migraine. I think it's awful. The thing that I noticed about him,
That should dismiss him right there. It's just his logo.
absolutely, that's how I make
Bad
my
graphics.
decisions.
The
It looks-
campaign never overcame bad graphics.
Google it, you'll see people if you see that logo. The thing that I saw about him recently was him apologizing for and walking back the stop and frisk thing that he was attached to. He was famous for, and I've got a lot of issues with him, libertarians in general, for a lot of his atrocities. But the stop and frisk, that was a big thing. That's something that people, whether they're in city or they're in flyover country of the rest of the country, nobody can get behind the idea of that. And I think that was a problem. The fact that he's walking it back already shows what else is he willing to backtrack on that he did when he was in New York.
Yeah, see, as usual, I have a totally different take on that. I think when he backtracked on the stop and frisk, he just pulled the plank out of the moderate position, or going after the moderates. Because when you look at his positions, very into climate change, very anti-gun, pro-choice up one side and down the other, he's not a moderate. But the one thing that he did do that Republicans might stand up and take notice of is bringing down crime in the Big Apple. And how did he do that? Well, a lot of people credit to stop and frisk. So when he went in and apologized for that, I thought, well, that's the end of that. Because
Despite
that
it being
is not gonna get
unconstitutional,
anywhere.
do you think that's going to appeal to
I'm not
conservatives?
talking about constitutional or unconstitutional or anything. I'm talking about the perception when you're going after a voting segment, which he clearly is. What voting
But is that
segment
gonna
can
work?
he go? It's not going to
Folks,
work now.
Okay, I don't
Back
think
to
it's gonna-
call. Scott in Austin, Texas on KLBJ. Go ahead.
How you doing, Bruce?
I'm doing fine.
I've got a question. Yeah, thank you, sir. I have a question for you, and I was going to kind of see, what y'all's opinion was on. Do you think that it's a good idea that we just let anybody off the streets run to be able to run this country, or do you think that maybe we should have a law to where you at least got to serve this country, or kind of in that general neighborhood.
I do not believe there should be any requirement for military service to run for political office. I do believe, as I think has been the case for umpteen years now, it's one of the factors that people look at when they are determining who they will vote for to nominate of the Republican or Democratic Party. And I think it's a valid point, and I think that serving. By the way, this is a point. Serving in the military, and again, the big point is that Pete Buttigieg served in the military. Tulsi Gabbard served in the military. I'm not so sure that serving in the military at the level and rank of Pete Buttigieg all of a sudden makes you ready to be the commander in chief. I just don't. I don't believe that.
No,
we're not talking about Eisenhower here.
Yeah, that's correct. But I do, and I don't think that we should have necessarily another requirement. I can tell you this: when I was working on Capitol Hill, members of the House and the Senate collectively had something like 6 to 8% of the body had military service backgrounds. The figure today is lower than 3%. And whether it's for the Congress or for the presidency, I think it is a consideration to be weighed by voters, whether somebody who's seeking these leadership positions has an understanding of what it means to serve, what it means to be in combat, and what it means to obey a chain of command and have respect for the rule of law. Because I think those are values that our military upholds on a daily basis. The men and women who are defending our constitutional liberties around the globe do have, I think, some unique insights that help them if they should choose to go into public service.
Mark in Carmel, California, listening to us on KION. Go ahead, California.
Hey, Bruce. So, listen, I caught the news at the break, and Nancy is backpedaling like crazy on this thing. I think she realizes they
On
have
which
a
thing?
circular firing squad.
I think she means going to the Senate.
Yeah.
They have a circular firing squad going on, and I don't see this coming to an impeachment vote because, frankly, they're scared to death of a Senate thing that Mitch has already said he's going to drag out to 6 or 8 weeks, and they can call whoever they want during the trial. And so I think even Obama weighed in on this last week by saying, whoa, guys, going way too left, way too fast. And I believe we saw a correction today. I caught the news at the break, which you guys don't hear.
Yeah.
And they're going, Pelosi's kind of backing off on this whole impeachment thing. And
Is she talking censure then?
well, hey, fine, censure.
Quick,
is
I want to ask our Democrat: Would a censure against the president to what extent would that appease the hard anti-Trumpers within the party?
It won't.
It won't.
No.
Okay.
Go on. I agree
Lindsey,
with you.
Lindsey Graham was already bringing up getting some paperwork on Hunter Biden's case to bring in for the Senate already. I think it was just yesterday.
Yeah. Well, he definitely
we will
they'll bring
see.
that.
I believe we will see impeachment votes on the House. Whether articles are adopted is another question.
I agree with you on that.
All right, on that moment of agreement on our program, we thank David Cohen from the Union League Club. David, always a pleasure to have you here and bring your congressional expertise.
Thank you.
Philip Beverly, thank you very much from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Jennifer Nevins, the world's famous nationalist, pro-Trumper, and of course Brian Lambert, the world's most famous Uber driver, libertarian from DuPage County. We thank you all for being with us. Our thanks to Hector Pacheco and Anthony Marshall. I'm sorry, Andrew Marshall. And Fritz, who was that other guy? Fritz Goldman. We thank you all. There's no D in the name. It's Goldman. I'm Bruce DuMont. So long. We'll see you next week. Until that time, this is Bruce DuMont. Good night from Chicago.